Okay, session number 2. In today's session, we will talk about the externals of a building. Externals of a building. Let me start by annotating on a typical building, which we'll use for illustrating what to look out for when you are doing a viewing. Now, there are various parts of the externals of a building that are very vital to consider. The first, I always like to start with the roof. This is the sun. Imagine this is rain coming down, and this is wind. Now, the building is exposed to the elements, and therefore, in assessing whether a building is fit for purpose, but also more importantly, is deserving of your capital, it's important to have an understanding of what to look out for when you do a site inspection. The roof is, in my opinion, the first place you start. Then you have the walls, and we'll talk about the walls in detail. Then you have the grounds, and then you could deal with things such as the doors, the windows. If it's a building that has a porch, you could have porches, and you could even have conservatories. Forgive my writing today. But these are the elements that constitute the externals of the building. The most important is the wall, the roof, the porches or the conservatory, and then the grounds. In addition to the grounds, you might then have what I would call boundary walls. Now, these are not directly part of the main building facade. With this, you could also have fences. You could also have a party wall. Okay, now with that as an introduction, let's go into the detail. And as I go through each of these items, I will try as much as I can to provide not too complicated or not too technical the information in such a way that it confuses you, or in such a way that it does the opposite, which is to enlighten and inform you. But what I would like you to do is, if you can, take a screenshot of this. And this is very useful because it means when you go to view a property, you can use these 6 or 7 items as a guiding, or as a guidance, or a guiding checklist to enable you remember what you were supposed to be doing. Now, I remember in the first session, and also in the second, or in the first session, and also in the introduction session, I made reference to the fact that when you're doing a site inspection or site visit, you've seen a building that you are interested in, it's meant to be for data collection. You're there to collect data. You're there as an investigator to ascertain, firstly, whether the property is deserving of your capital. Secondly, whether the price that is being listed for, the market price, you're there to identify whether it's too high or too low in relation to the property's intrinsic value. You're there also to understand the repairs that are needed. And finally, you're there to understand the extent of professional advice or consultation that you might need, either from a legal expert or from a technical expert, such as a contractor, an engineer, an architect. So these are the 6 items I will try to discuss today. Now, let's begin. I like to start from the top, the roof. Now, imagine that is the roof, that's the roof cap. Now, I'm going to use several words. You may not be familiar with these words, but please do not let it discourage you. You can come back and listen to this a number of times. Let me make a segue. Forgive me. Let me make a segue and just divert from this discussion and talk about what I would call the flow process for a purchase. And I do this very for the purpose of making you aware of the necessity for you to remain calm as you listen and you learn. Imagine this to be the flow process. Discovery, in other words, you've discovered the property. Let's say you are going to be raising funds to purchase the property from the bank or a lending agency, a building society, or investors. So first thing you do is you discover the property, you make an offer. Let's say the offer is accepted. Then you go back to your lending team, either the bank, and the bank will approve, let's say approval. And what will normally happen is, because the bank is loaning or lending you money, sometimes the investors who are loaning you money might decide to send someone to do a survey to understand whether this asset you're trying to buy, whether it's fit for purpose and whether it's deserving of their capital. And the reason for that is because this is something called the basic accounting equation. It says the assets equals liabilities plus equity. We usually call this owner's equity. This simply means the lender, who could be the bank, and then your deposit in total will equal the asset. Now, once the survey is done, the information comes back to the lender and they say, yes, we think the property is fine, and then you're issued a mortgage. In other words, this is quite a misnomer. It's quite misleading, because you are the one who issues the bank the mortgage. It's not the other way around. You issue the bank a mortgage, and I will cover this later on, but in effect, the bank approves your mortgage to them. I'll deal with this later on, and then the purchase takes place. So everything I'm teaching here, the reason I took some time to explain these processes is so that you can have some peace and comfort in knowing that you do not have to remember everything I say. The reason is because you will have a technical expert representing the bank on your behalf, who will look out for all of these items that I'm about to explain. The reason I'm explaining them is because you usually make your offer at this point, and therefore the price that you offer, once it's accepted, you cannot go back except during or except under very, very, very very special circumstances. You usually will not go back. Let me not use the word you cannot. You usually will not go back to renegotiate. Although your offer is based on subject to conditions and survey, etc. The reason I'm explaining this is so that you know what to discount, or rather you know how much to offer before you get to this stage. Now, that said, let me move very quickly back to what we were talking about. The building is exposed to the elements, the sun, the rain, wind, and all the external climatic conditions. The first thing I said is, when you do your inspection, I like to do my inspections on a rainy day. And the reason is because I like to understand how well the building is protected from the elements. If it's raining, it gives me an opportunity to observe several parts of the structure and how well they work. The most important thing I'm trying to understand is whether the building is what we call weathertight. I'm also trying to inspect and see how good the drainage is. So we'll start with the roof. Let's start with the roof. And then we'll work our way all the way through. Now, this is some observations I want you to make. Number one, when you arrive at the property, the first thing I'd like you to do is set your timer. I want you to set your timer to 15 minutes. I like to use 20 minutes. And this is for the purpose of doing a very detailed, thorough inspection. I usually would arrive half an hour before the agent or half an hour before the scheduled time for the inspection or for the viewing before the agent arrives, so that I can critically appraise the externals of the building. So set your time to 15 or 20 minutes. The reason is because you are not allowed to go into the building until you've exhausted this time. And this would allow you to go through and identify the condition of the building for each of these items that I have mentioned. Now, dealing with the roof, I'll deal with the roof together with the chimney. So let's start. The roof, you have what we call coverings. In other words, you have roof tiles. The first thing you want to observe is what type. Is it clay? What type of material is it? Just make a visual observation. You have your timer on. You must always have a book and a pen or a pencil. It's acceptable to use a mobile device. I usually will not use a mobile device because I like to make sketches. Mobile devices are great. However, there's nothing like having a pen and a paper, and you can sketch and you can make notes, and you could say, well, I saw something there and it didn't look right, and I saw something there and it didn't look right. You can sketch out the building. So the first thing is the coverings. What type? The next thing you want to look at is the roof cap. This is called a cap. Now, next time you walk down your street, I'd like you to make an observation. You will notice that every building that has a pitched roof usually will have a cap. The reason is because you have two sections of the roof coming together, and they're not welded together. So what you do is you put a hat, and this is to prevent water ingress into the building. And usually this has a life, what we call an economic life, and therefore it needs replacing. Because it's been exposed to the elements, at some point they start to damage and they fall off. And the last thing you want is water coming into the building. So you're looking at the condition of the roof cap. The next thing you want to look at is what we call the fascia board. I'll show you what this looks like. Every roof, remember the purpose of the roof is to protect the envelope, the facade. And therefore, at the end of this, you don't want the water to drain down uncollected, and you don't want the water to drain on the walls. So you would normally have what we call a rainwater pipe. And this means that if this is a roof, for example, and at the end of this roof, you would put a board, and on that board, you would install a rainwater pipe. You fix this to this board, and then you have something like this. So what you're looking for is, this section is called the fascia board. You want to look at the condition of this. Is it wood? Is it some of PVC? This other section is called the soffit. soffit. You also want to see the condition. I'd like you to make an observation sometime tomorrow or later on today. If you can, just walk down the streets and just observe. All of these words will become very familiar to you as you make daily observations of other buildings. Do not wait until you get to the date of your inspection. Just make these observations every day. Now, you have the soffit, and all you're doing here is trying to understand the condition. That's all. So we've dealt with the roof. You're just making observations. The next is the chimney. Now this is called the chimney stack. I'd like you to observe the rendering of the stack. In other words, is it just a brick stack or has it been rendered? So you could have a chimney and it's brick. Now the reason you're doing this is the chimney is the one area exposed to the element, just like the roof, that has no protection. So what tends to happen is after a while, the brick starts to crack, or the brick might start to become loose and it needs to be refixed. This is very important. I cannot stress this enough. It is very, very important. Now you might be thinking, what is the big deal? It's just the chimney stack. The reason is because there are health and safety issues. Remember, this sits all the way up, and this could be a building that is 4 stories tall. This means if this becomes unsafe and falls, it could injure someone. So this has to be regularly maintained under a specific timetable. Now the reason the roof and the chimney, I've started with those, is because they are usually, or rather, the chimney and the roof, if you're not careful, could cause your investment to, let me choose the words right, the status of the chimney and the roof could be so poor that what was a shrewd investment becomes a very poor investment. And the reason for that is because you may have bought a property at a discount to the intrinsic value. However, because you made no observations, you did not notice that a significant amount of repair work is needed. And as soon as you've completed the purchase, you then find out that you have to spend or expend so much money to repair the chimney or the roof, which would then mean that when you add the cost of the repairs to your total cost, purchase cost, you might realize that you've actually overpaid. So this is important. Now, the reason the chimney and the condition of the chimney is important is because in the UK or in various parts, I would imagine, of Europe, there are restrictions on working at a certain height. So in the UK, we normally would have what we call scaffolds. So you would have to get a team to install scaffolding, so that people can go up and work. Now, these scaffolds are installed usually 2 days before the commencement of the contractor or the specialist contractor who is repairing the roof or the chimney. And in some cases, they might be there 2 days afterwards. It's a very, very, in my opinion, disingenuous way of providing service. The people who hire out the scaffolds tend to charge you on a daily basis. So the longer they can charge you for the scaffolds, the better for them. So they'll probably provide the scaffolds early and take it off late. This means that you will be paying for a scaffold. Now, for a typical building, this could cost you in the region of something of about, say, 2,000 to 4,000, depending on how long it takes to repair the roof and the chimney, because this sometimes could take a week to do all the work. It depends on how very poorly maintained the building has been. So I'm stressing this because in addition to just repairing the chimney you have to take into account the fact that you will have to bring in someone to provide a scaffold. You have to pay them on a daily basis, and then pay the contractor who will be repairing the chimney. So on the chimney, you're trying to understand, is it brick, is it render? You're trying to also understand the condition of what we call the chimney cap. I'll just say chimney cap or chimney pots. In other words, you might have a chimney like this, and there's a covering. This is the chimney pots, and sometimes you might have caps that prevent water ingress down the flue. So you're looking at the chimney. Now I'm going to say something about a part of the chimney that I would like you to bear in mind. It's called the flashing, chimney flashing. And let me explain how this works. Just imagine this to be the roof and the chimney. Okay, and this chimney continues. It's a brick, and this is the roof. At the section or the intersection where the roof and the chimney, where they intersect, you have to provide a level of additional material. It's literally a metallic material to prevent water ingress through the chimney into the building. Anytime you walk down the street, I like you to just observe chimneys. You would tend to find that most of them, at this intersection, there's something either shiny, it's either shiny, like a metallic object, or it's painted. It's a different type of material, but it looks quite different to the chimney and the roof, and that is to provide protection. We call that flashing. Now, these are just observations you are making. Again, the surveyor will capture most of these items, but what you're trying to do here is quickly identify how much extra might be needed. Now, so let's say, for example, you've identified that you need to spend 2,000 for the scaffold. Let's say you identify that the roof is very in poor quality, and a typical roof, if to replace the roof, say if the roof has been there for over 20 years and there's been no repairs, then you should be allocating some money for repairs anytime soon, to re-tile the entire roof. With the contractor's fee, this could cost you something in the region of about 10,000. Then the chimney. To do the chimney, if you're doing that with the same contractor doing the roof, let's say this costs you about 2,000. To, in this case, repoint the brick, fix the flashing, maybe fix the chimney pot or the cap. So in total, you're looking at 2 plus 10 plus roughly 4,000. So suddenly 16,000. And that's the reason why I'm stressing the importance of looking out for these items. So we've dealt with the roof, we've dealt with the chimney. The next part I'd like to talk about is the rainwater pipes. Sounds quite easy, sounds quite simple, but imagine that to be your building still. Pitched roof. In this session, I will not talk about the types of roofs. I don't think it's necessary. I don't think you need to know much about that. But that's your rainwater pipes. There's your rainwater gutters. And there's your rainwater pipes coming all the way down. The intention is you collect all the water using gutters, and you transfer all that water down pipes, and these pipes go down what we call an underground drainage pipe into the sewer. So what you're trying to do is also observe on the condition of these pipes. Rainwater goods. So rainwater pipes, we call this down pipes, gutters. We've already talked about the fascia board, because it's the fascia board that usually supports the gutters. So we've discussed the fascia boards previously. We don't have to talk about those again. All I want you to do is observe on the quality. Look at the type of material. Is this PVC? Is it plastic? Is it cast iron? What material is this? Is it aluminium? What material? Makes a difference. The reason it makes a difference is because if you have to replace them, the type of material makes a difference. Some materials are easy to install and cheaper. Some require more specialist work and much harder to install. So you're looking at the rainwater installation. I said to you before that I like to go do my viewing when it's raining. So I can just stand back and observe whether the rainwater pipes are collecting the water from the property. Now, one of the reasons I like to observe that is because I like to see whether any of these pipes is leaking. If there is a leaking gutter, and let me do this in more detail. Now this is a roof, and imagine this to be the fascia board and this to be your gutter. If this leaks, very likely it will lead to timber rotten or timber damage of the fascia board. If this is timber, it would also lead to timber damage of any timber on the building. If there is no timber on the building, if there's a leak or the rainwater pipes are leaking, you mean the water would run down the walls, and this could cause very serious issues in relation to cracking of the brick. It could lead to deterioration of the brick. So it's very important you just make that observation. If you happen to do your viewing on a sunny day, you can still look at the pipes, and usually you can look at a pipe and you would see, because when water spills out from the internal part of a pipe to the external, it usually leaves material, like as a result of condensation when it dries up. So you'll be able to identify whether you believe it's leaking. So that's the rainwater goods. Next, let's talk about conservatories or porches. Okay, so some buildings, if you imagine this to be the building, and that's the street, and there you are standing. Some buildings normally will have what's called a porch. And that's the entrance door. And you're going that way. This is usually in timber or whatever material it might be. You want to check and see what the condition of this is as well. So in addition to the structure, you're looking at the porch to see the condition of the porch. In addition to that, you might find from the entrance of the building, you want to look at the floor and the landscape. Is it well tiled? The quality of the tiling. In addition, you want to see whether there's a front garden and how well it's maintained. Let me illustrate this with a plan, an aerial view plan. Let's assume that this is the building looking from the top, and that's the chimney. Let's assume this is the front garden. This is the entrance. And this is the porch. You might have a front garden. You might also have, I'll come back to this later on, a boundary wall. I'll discuss this later, but you want to look and observe the condition of this wall and the adjacencies, in other words, what is next to the building. And then you might have the rear of the building as well. So porches are important. To the rear of the building, sometimes you might have a conservatory, and you also need to review the conservatory in the same way you do a porch. I hope that's easily understood. Now, why have we gone through all of this to understand the various parts of the external of the building? Well, the reason we're doing this is simply because one of the things you'll find out during the process of purchasing a property is this word. Responsibilities. In other words, who's responsible? Who's responsible for maintaining? Who's responsible for replacing, repairing? It makes a huge difference. Some buildings in the UK or some buildings in London, let's imagine that you are buying a top floor flat. You might find that in some cases, because you are buying the top floor flat, in your lease, it states that you are responsible for the chimney repairs, and you're responsible for the roof, and you're responsible for all the items that I've explained, like the fascia board, etc. What does that mean? Well, let me just go back to the first page. What this means is that the £10,000 for the roof, the £4,000 for the scaffold, and the £2,000 for the chimney repair, which is £16,000, you're liable for it. You're liable for £16,000. On the other hand, if the lease document or the lease title deeds state that the repair is jointly maintained, in other words, that the responsibility for the maintenance of the roof and all the other areas of the building, then what you then have is a shared responsibility. It would mean that that 16,000 will now be shared. Assuming this is just two flats, it will be shared by two people. So it's now 8,000 you're responsible for. It's a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. Now, if there are, say, assuming that there are 4 flats, then it's 4,000 per person. Compare this 4,000 against 16,000. So it's important you understand and bear in mind that some of this information I'm sharing is not necessarily to overload you with data. No, it's simply to allow you to think at a second level, which is very different to others. There are some times where you might actually find a property that you really like. Now, let me qualify everything that I've said so far. I'm assuming here that you're buying a flat in a building, as opposed to buying the entire building, including the land. When you're buying just the flat, in other words, when you're buying the leasehold of the building, then everything I've just said will apply. If you're buying the freehold, then you are the owner. You're responsible. You own the entire site or the land and the building, fee simple. It means you are responsible. When you're buying the leasehold, you are